It was very early on in their relationship when Harry is bowled over by Meghan, is desperately in love.
What she allowed it to become, which I think was unforgivable, was a tirade against the racist royal family.
The question really is whether Harry realizes himself how he has completely cut himself off, and whether, if something goes wrong in his own marriage...
The world watched a fairy tale unfold, a royal wedding draped in elegance, history, and global admiration. But behind the polished smiles and perfectly timed moments, another story was quietly taking shape. Tom Bower, known for digging beneath the surface, claims the reality was far more complex than anyone imagined. Beneath the spectacle, there were tensions, calculated moves, and fractures few could see. But what if the most celebrated royal union of modern times wasn't what it seemed at all? What he reveals next doesn't just challenge the narrative, it reshapes it entirely. Now look closer. What hidden detail do you think the world completely overlooked, and why does it matter more than we were told? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe now as we uncover what was never meant to be seen. A celebration shadowed by quiet doubt. From the outside, everything appeared flawless. The world watched as Meghan Markle and Prince Harry moved toward what was being called a once-in-a-generation royal wedding. The setting, the anticipation, the global attention, it all carried the weight of a modern fairy tale. Every image told the same story: unity, excitement, and a future filled with promise. But beneath that carefully presented surface, something far less visible was beginning to take shape. According to accounts later explored by Tom Bower, there were already quiet concerns circulating within royal circles long before the vows were spoken. These were not public statements. There were no official warnings, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, what existed was a growing sense of unease, subtle, controlled, and largely unspoken. Those closest to the institution had seen enough over time to recognize patterns, and what they were observing did not entirely align with the image being presented to the world. It was not one single moment that raised the alarm. It was the accumulation of smaller signals, decisions that felt slightly out of step with royal tradition, interactions that, while not openly disruptive, carried an edge that was difficult to ignore. The kind of details that do not make headlines, but linger in private conversations. Within those spaces, questions began to form. Not loud questions, not accusations, but cautious reflections about what this marriage might mean in the long run. At the same time, the public narrative moved in the opposite direction. Headlines focused on romance, on change, on the idea of a new chapter for the monarchy. The contrast between what was seen publicly and what was felt privately created a quiet tension. One version of the story was being celebrated on a global stage. Another was being carefully considered behind palace walls. What made this moment particularly significant was timing. These concerns were not emerging after the wedding, shaped by hindsight or influenced by later events. They existed before everything became official, before the ceremony, before the commitments were sealed. That detail alone shifts the perspective. It suggests that what unfolded later may not have been entirely unexpected by those watching closely from within. And yet, none of this was visible to the millions who tuned in. The spectacle moved forward, untouched by doubt, wrapped in tradition and precision. To the world, it remained perfect, complete, certain. But that quiet uncertainty did not appear without reason. It had been building, piece by piece, shaped by moments that, at the time, seemed small, until they weren't. Hidden beneath flawless ceremony and global admiration, something far less perfect was quietly unfolding. Every polished moment concealed fragments of a deeper story. If everything looked so certain, why were subtle cracks forming long before anyone noticed? And what truth were they all leading toward? Let's unravel the truth. A meeting that may not have been chance. That quiet uncertainty did not simply exist on its own. It was connected to something deeper, something that began long before the engagement, long before the headlines, and long before the world was invited to witness the story unfold. As attention shifts backward, the origins of the relationship itself begin to take on a different tone, one that feels less accidental and more deliberate. According to Tom Bower, The path that led Meghan Markle into Prince Harry's world was not as spontaneous as it was often presented. In interviews, the connection was described as natural, almost effortless. A blind date, a simple introduction, two people meeting without expectation. But Bauer's account introduces a different perspective, one shaped by preparation and intention rather than coincidence. He suggests that in the years leading up to that first meeting, Meghan had already been moving steadily through increasingly influential social circles. This was not a sudden shift. It was gradual and focused. From around 2013, following the breakdown of her first marriage, her direction appeared to change. The environment around her began to reflect a different kind of ambition, one that aligned more closely with wealth, status, and global visibility. Each step seemed to bring her closer to a world where connections mattered just as much as opportunity. Within that context, the introduction to Prince Harry takes on added significance. Bauer claims that before their first encounter in London, Meghan had already taken time to understand who Harry was, not just the public figure but the person behind the image, his interests, his values, the causes he cared about, Africa, conservation, humanitarian work. These were not random details. They were central to his identity, and according to Bauer, they were studied carefully. That level of preparation raises an uncomfortable question. Was this truly a chance meeting, or was it the result of careful positioning? The answer is not presented as fact, but the suggestion alone begins to shift the way the story is viewed. It introduces the possibility that what appeared effortless on the surface may have been guided by intention behind the scenes. What makes this even more compelling is how naturally everything seemed to unfold afterward. The connection appeared immediate. The chemistry is undeniable. From the outside, it felt authentic, almost inevitable. But when placed against the backdrop of prior movement, research, and timing, the simplicity of that narrative becomes harder to accept without question. Everything looked effortless, almost destined, as their connection deepened with striking speed and certainty. But when timing, preparation, and precision are placed side by side, one question lingers. Was this truly fate unfolding, or something far more deliberate already set in motion? Stay with us. A connection that intensified at unusual speed. And then, once they met, everything began to move with striking speed. What had started as a single introduction in London quickly turned into something far more intense, far more consuming. To those watching from the outside, it looked like a powerful and immediate connection. Two people finding certainty in each other without hesitation. But beneath that surface, the pace itself began to raise quiet questions. To Tom Bauer, the relationship between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry did not follow the slow and measured path often expected within royal life. Instead, it accelerated. Emotions deepened quickly. Decisions followed closely behind. Within a short period, Harry appeared completely invested, not only emotionally, but personally and mentally as well. He spoke openly about how certain he felt, how quickly he believed he had found the person he had been searching for. That level of certainty, so early on, became a defining feature of the relationship. It gave the story a sense of intensity that was difficult to ignore. Bauer points to what has been described as love bombing, a term used to explain a pattern where affection, attention, and emotional connection are expressed in overwhelming amounts at the beginning of a relationship. It creates a powerful bond, one that can feel genuine and undeniable, but also one that forms very quickly. In this case, that rapid emotional build seemed to draw Harry in completely. His responses reflected deep attachment, formed in a relatively short time. The relationship became central to his world. Plans were discussed early. The future was imagined almost immediately. From the outside, it felt like a modern love story moving at its own pace. But inside royal circles, where caution and tradition often guide decisions, that pace stood out. There were also subtle suggestions of urgency, not pressure in an obvious sense, but a steady movement toward commitment that left little room for pause. Conversations about the future, about life choices, and even about timelines appeared to happen earlier than expected. The relationship did not linger in uncertainty. It moved forward with purpose. What makes this moment even more significant is how it connects back to everything that came before. The preparation, the positioning, the understanding of Harry as an individual. When placed together, these elements create a picture that feels carefully aligned, even if it is not openly acknowledged. To the public, it remained a story of love unfolding naturally. To those looking more closely, it became something more layered, something that invited a second look, not because of what was visible, but because of how quickly everything fell into place. But the most noticeable change was not just the speed of the relationship, it was what began to happen around it, and who Harry was becoming within it. What if the love story everyone believed was only the surface of something far more calculated, where every moment aligned too perfectly to be a coincidence? And as the romance intensified, why did everything around Harry begin to quietly change in ways few could explain? Stay glued. The quiet distance that changed everything. But the most noticeable change was not just the speed of the relationship, it was what began to shift around it. Slowly at first, then with more clarity, the space around Prince Harry started to look different. The people who had been part of his life for years, those who knew him long before the spotlight intensified, began to fade from view. According to accounts examined by Tom Bauer, this was not a sudden break. It was gradual, subtle, the kind of change that does not announce itself but becomes impossible to ignore once it settles in. At the center of this shift was a reported moment during a shooting weekend at Sandringham in 2017. What should have been a familiar gathering among close friends became something else entirely. During that weekend, conversations reportedly turned tense. Topics that might once have been brushed aside began to carry weight. Jokes and comments, especially those touching on sensitive social issues, were no longer received in the same way. Meghan Markle was said to have challenged certain remarks directly, creating an atmosphere that felt different from what Harry's friends were used to. It was not just a disagreement, it was a shift in tone, one that made the environment feel less relaxed and more guarded. What followed carried even greater significance. According to reports, that weekend marked a turning point. The bond between Harry and parts of his inner circle began to loosen. People who had once been constant in his life were no longer as present. Invitations changed. Communication slowed. The connection did not disappear overnight, but it weakened in ways that became increasingly clear. The impact of that shift became visible as the wedding approached. Events that should have included lifelong friends told a different story. Some of those closest to Harry were notably absent from key moments, including the private dinner after the wedding. Their absence did not go unnoticed. For those familiar with royal tradition, where loyalty and long-standing relationships often hold deep meaning, this change felt significant. In their place, new faces began to appear. The circle around Harry was evolving, shaped by a different set of influences and priorities. To some, it reflected a natural transition into a new phase of life. To others, it raised questions about what had been left behind and why. What makes this moment particularly striking is how quietly it unfolded. There were no public statements explaining the distance, no official acknowledgement of what had changed. Yet the effect was real, and it altered the dynamic around Harry in a way that would continue to echo beyond the wedding itself. And as those familiar faces stepped back, the composition of the guest list began to reveal something even more unexpected. Something shifted quietly, without warning, without explanation, yet powerful enough to reshape everything around Prince Harry. As familiar faces disappeared and unexpected names emerged, what was really being revealed? And why did it feel like only the beginning? Keep watching. A guest list that told a different story. And as those familiar faces stepped back, the composition of the guest list began to reveal something even more unexpected. What should have been a reflection of lifelong relationships and shared history started to look very different from what many had anticipated. The wedding at St. George's Chapel in Windsor in May 2018 was watched by millions across the world. But behind the grandeur, the names on that list quietly raised questions. According to observations highlighted by Tom Bauer, there was a noticeable shift in who was present and who was not. Several of Prince Harry's long-standing friends, individuals who had been part of his life for years, were either missing entirely or excluded from key private events surrounding the ceremony. These were not distant acquaintances. These were people who had shared history with him, who were expected to stand close during such a significant moment. Their absence did not align with royal tradition. where continuity and loyalty often shape the guest list. In contrast, the arrival of high-profile celebrities stood out immediately. Well-known figures from Hollywood and global media circles were given prominent places at the ceremony. Some of these individuals, by multiple reports, had little to no personal connection with the couple prior to the wedding. Their presence added a different kind of energy to the occasion. It shifted the tone from something deeply personal to something that felt, at least in part, carefully curated for a global audience. To those watching closely, this contrast became difficult to ignore. On one side were missing friends with years of shared experience. On the other were internationally recognized figures whose relationships with the couple appeared recent or limited. The balance felt unusual, especially within the context of a royal wedding, where tradition typically favors established bonds over new introductions. This change also carried a deeper implication. It suggested that the wedding was not only a personal milestone, but also an opportunity to shape perception. The presence of influential names created a powerful image, one that extended far beyond the royal family itself. It connected the event to a wider network of visibility and influence, blurring the line between private celebration and public positioning. For some, this could be seen as a natural reflection of a modern relationship bridging different worlds. For others, it raised a more complex question. Was this simply about sharing an important day with a diverse group of people? Or was there a more deliberate intention behind who was invited and who was not? What made this moment even more striking was that the most significant absence was not found among friends or public figures. It was something far closer, far more personal, and impossible to overlook once it came into focus. Some saw a modern union of worlds colliding. Others sensed something carefully arranged beneath the surface. But if the guest list was deliberate, what does the most personal absence reveal, and why does it point to a far bigger story still waiting to unfold? Stay tuned. The absence that spoke the loudest. What made this moment even more striking was that the most significant absence was not found among friends or public figures. It was something far closer, far more personal, and impossible to overlook once it came into focus. As the world watched Meghan Markle walk down the aisle at St. George's Chapel in Windsor in May 2018, one detail stood out with quiet force. Her family, with the exception of her mother, was almost entirely missing. At the center of that absence was her father, Thomas Markle. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, his name had already been pulled into public controversy. Reports emerged that he had staged paparazzi photographs, images that quickly spread across global media. The situation escalated further when it was revealed that he had suffered a heart attack just days before the ceremony, ultimately making it impossible for him to attend. What should have been a deeply emotional and symbolic moment, a father walking his daughter down the aisle, was suddenly removed from the narrative. But according to accounts explored by Tom Bauer, the distance between Meghan and her father did not begin with that incident. It had reportedly been developing well before the wedding. There were suggestions that she had already created space between herself and parts of her family months earlier. That context adds a different layer to the story, one that moves beyond last-minute circumstances and into a pattern that had been forming quietly in the background. The absence extended beyond her father. Her brother and sister were not present. The usual presence of extended family, which often plays a visible role in weddings of this scale, was largely missing. In contrast, one figure remained. Her mother, Doria Ragland, was the only member of her immediate family in attendance. She arrived shortly before the ceremony and stood alone in a setting filled with royalty, dignitaries, and global figures. Her presence carried a calm dignity, but it also highlighted the emptiness around her. Within royal circles, this unusual family dynamic did not go unnoticed. According to reports, there were efforts behind the scenes to manage the situation before it became a larger public issue. King Charles III, then Prince Charles, stepped in to walk Meghan down part of the aisle, a gesture that was both supportive and symbolic. It helped preserve the image of unity, but it did not fully answer the questions surrounding the absence of her own family. What made this moment even more complex was how it contrasted with the image the wedding was meant to present. It was positioned as a union not just between two individuals, but between worlds, cultures, and families. Yet the visible reality told a more complicated story. one where certain connections were missing entirely. And while the ceremony itself moved forward with precision and grace, inside the palace, a different kind of tension had already begun to take shape. Everything looked unified, worlds blending, cultures meeting, history unfolding, yet something vital was missing, something no camera could fully capture. As the ceremony moved flawlessly, unseen tension quietly built behind palace doors. What truth was already unfolding beyond the perfect image the world believed? Let's find out. Pressure behind the palace doors. And while the ceremony itself moved forward with precision and grace, inside the palace a different kind of tension had already begun to take shape. It was not visible to the public. It did not appear in official statements or carefully released photographs. But within the working environment behind the scenes, the atmosphere was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. According to accounts examined by Tom Bower, members of the palace staff began to experience growing pressure during the months leading up to the May 2018 wedding at Windsor. These were individuals who had spent years, sometimes decades, serving the royal household. They were familiar with high expectations and complex events. Royal weddings were not new to them. Yet this situation, by several reports, felt different. The demands were described as intense and constant. Instructions changed quickly. Details were revisited repeatedly. What might have been a routine part of planning became something far more exhausting. Some staff members reportedly felt overwhelmed, as though the pace and level of control left little room to operate with confidence. Instead of clear direction, there was a sense of being closely monitored at every step. This created an emotional strain that extended beyond simple workload. Communication became more cautious. Interactions required careful handling. According to reports, some individuals began to avoid direct engagement whenever possible, not out of resistance, but out of a need to protect themselves from further pressure. The environment, once structured and predictable, began to feel uncertain. At the center of these accounts was Meghan Markle, whose approach to planning was described as highly hands-on. She wanted things done in a specific way, with little room for deviation. While that level of involvement can be seen as commitment, within the rigid structure of royal operations, it created friction. The system was built on tradition, hierarchy, and established processes. When those systems were challenged, even subtly, the effect could be significant. There were also moments that highlighted the tension more clearly. During discussions about details such as the bridesmaid dresses, differences in opinion reportedly emerged. These were not major conflicts in isolation, but within an already pressured environment, they added to the strain. Each disagreement, each revision, contributed to a growing sense that the situation was becoming harder to manage. What makes this particularly important is that the strain was not limited to logistics. It pointed to something deeper, a disconnect between expectation and structure, between a new approach and a long-established system. For those inside the palace, it was becoming clear that this was not simply about organizing a wedding. It was about navigating a shift that did not easily fit within the existing framework. And as that pressure continued to build behind closed doors, it became evident that the story unfolding was not only about planning or personality. It was about something far more calculated, something tied closely to how everything would ultimately be seen by the world. Behind the flawless ceremony, something far more complex was unfolding, a clash between tradition and a new, unyielding force. Was this tension simply growing pains, or the early signs of a carefully shaped transformation that would redefine everything the world thought it understood? Stay Glued, a ceremony designed for more than romance. And as that pressure continued to build behind closed doors, it became evident that the story unfolding was not only about planning or personality. It was about something far more calculated, something tied closely to how everything would ultimately be seen by the world. What appeared to be a celebration of love on the surface began to carry the weight of something larger, something more intentional. From Tom Bower, the wedding of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry in May 2018 was not just a personal milestone. It was also, in his view, a powerful global platform. The scale of the event alone made that possible. Millions watched from across the world. Every detail was broadcast, analyzed, and remembered. In that environment, even the smallest choice carried significance. Bower suggests that many of those choices were not random. They were carefully considered, shaped to create a specific impression. The setting at Windsor, the atmosphere inside St. George's Chapel, the timing of each moment. All of it contributed to a narrative that reached far beyond the ceremony itself. The wedding became more than a union between two individuals. It became a moment of global visibility, one that placed Meghan at the center of an audience unlike any she had experienced before. There is no suggestion that the emotion of the day was absent. The connection between the couple was clear to those watching, but alongside that emotion, there appeared to be a strong awareness of image, how things looked, how they would be received, how they would be remembered. In a world where public perception carries real influence, that awareness can shape decisions in subtle but powerful ways. The guest list, the presentation, even the way certain elements were introduced to the public, all seemed to align with a broader sense of positioning. It created a moment that was not only meaningful within the royal family, but also influential on a global cultural level. The wedding was no longer just a private event shared with the world. It became something that could define identity, shape reputation, and open doors far beyond the palace. For some observers, this reflects the reality of modern royal life, a recognition that global attention can be used to create impact. For others, it raises a more complex question about intention. Where does celebration end and strategy begin? At what point does a personal moment become something more structured, more controlled? What makes this perspective particularly striking is how seamlessly everything appeared to come together. Nothing felt out of place, nothing seemed forced. And yet, when viewed through this lens, each detail begins to carry a different meaning, one that suggests careful design rather than simple coincidence. And as that image took shape in front of the world, it became clear that it was being guided not only by what was happening in the present, but also by something rooted deeply in the past. Everything looked flawless, every moment perfectly aligned. Yet beneath that precision, something deeper was quietly shaping the narrative. Was this truly a seamless love story, or a carefully guided image influenced by forces rooted in the past that few ever questioned? An echo of the past that stirred unease. And as that image took shape in front of the world, it became clear that it was being guided not only by what was happening in the present, but also by something rooted deeply in the past. A powerful comparison began to emerge, one that carried emotional weight far beyond symbolism. The connection being drawn between Meghan Markle and Princess Diana was not subtle. It appeared in conversations, in media coverage, and in the way the story of the wedding was presented to the public. For many watching, the comparison felt natural. Diana's legacy remains one of the most influential in modern royal history. Her compassion, her global impact, and her connection with ordinary people created a lasting image that continues to shape how new figures within the monarchy are perceived. Placing Meghan within that same frame gave the wedding an added sense of meaning. It suggested continuity, a new chapter built on a familiar emotional foundation. However, according to insights explored by Tom Bauer, not everyone within royal circles was comfortable with this comparison. For some insiders, the parallels felt premature. Diana's position within the royal family had been shaped over years of public service, personal struggle, and deeply visible commitment. Her relationship with the monarchy, despite its complexities, was built through time and experience. To see those qualities reflected onto someone so early in her royal journey created a sense of tension. There were also concerns about accuracy. The idea that two individuals, separated by different backgrounds, different circumstances, and different paths into the royal family, could be placed side by side so quickly did not sit easily with those who understood the weight of that legacy. It was not simply a comparison. It was an emotional reference point, one that carried deep significance for both the institution and the public. For Prince Harry, the connection to his mother was deeply personal. His desire to protect and support Meghan naturally drew attention to similarities, whether intentional or not. But within the structure of the royal family, where history is carefully preserved and respected, this alignment created discomfort. It raised questions about how narratives were being shaped and whether those narratives fully reflected reality. At the same time, the public response added another layer. Many embraced the comparison, seeing it as a sign of hope and continuity. Others began to question whether the image being presented was being guided in a particular direction. The line between genuine connection and constructed narrative became harder to define. What makes this moment particularly striking is how sensitive it was. It touched on memory, legacy, and identity all at once. It was not simply about perception. It was about how the past was being used to shape the present. And as those questions continued to grow, they led directly into what would become the most controversial and unsettling claim of all. It was never just about a wedding. It reached into legacy, identity, and the weight of history itself. But if the past was being reshaped in real time, what was it preparing the world to accept next? And why does the truth feel even bigger? A vision that reached far beyond the altar. And as those questions continued to grow, they led directly into what would become the most controversial and unsettling claim of all. It shifts the focus away from the ceremony itself and towards something much larger, something that extends beyond May 2018 at Windsor and into a broader picture of ambition, influence, and long-term positioning. According to Tom Bauer, the wedding between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry may not have been the final destination of the story. Instead, it could have been a gateway, a moment that opened access to a level of global recognition, power, and opportunity that had previously been out of reach. This perspective does not dismiss the reality of the relationship, but it places it within a wider context that feels more strategic than purely personal. Bauer suggests that Meghan's trajectory, even before entering royal life, reflected a clear desire for upward movement. From around 2013, her path appeared to align with increasing visibility and stronger connections within influential circles. When that trajectory intersects with a figure like Prince Harry, the impact becomes immediate and far-reaching. The royal platform is unlike any other. It carries history, attention, and authority that extend across continents. To step into that space is to gain access to a network that few individuals ever reach. The wedding itself amplified that access. The presence of global figures, the scale of media coverage, and the attention from industries beyond the royal family all contributed to a moment that connected Meghan to a powerful international audience. According to this view, those connections were not temporary. They became part of a foundation that could be built upon in the years that followed. Deals, partnerships, and opportunities that emerged later begin to look less surprising when placed against the backdrop of that moment. This raises a question that sits at the center of the narrative. Was the relationship simply a personal bond that led naturally to marriage? Or was it also part of a larger plan shaped by long-term goals? The suggestion is not presented as confirmed fact, but it introduces a level of complexity that is difficult to ignore. It invites a different way of looking at the choices, the timing, and the outcomes. What makes this claim particularly striking is how it reframes everything that came before. The preparation, the rapid connection, the shifting social circle, the carefully constructed image. Each element begins to feel connected, as though part of a broader movement rather than isolated moments. And if that perspective holds even a fraction of truth, then the story of the royal wedding is not just about what the world witnessed that day, but about what was quietly set in motion beyond it. So, what do you think? Was the royal wedding a genuine love story, or a carefully shaped illusion hiding deeper truths and shifting loyalties? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.